I'm going to start with icebreaker. And I'm just wondering, Dr. Menard, I'm so happy to have you here with us today. Can you give us, the audience, a little background on who you are?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Janice Maynor, and I'm a professor with tenure at the Perlmutter Cancer Center of NYU. I'm a new recruit to NYU. I joined in July. And before that, I spent the first part of my career at Rutgers, where I built a clinical trials program dedicated to skin cancer patients. And I also developed and led the phase 1 program there for a number of years. And so this is such an important topic, and it's truly passionate to me. I'll tell you a little bit about my own journey into oncology. Like many, I went into healthcare. There were no physicians in my family, but I had my grandmother and I were extremely close, and she was ill a lot of the time. And I was growing up, and I always felt this insecurity when I couldn't understand what the doctors and the nurses were saying, and what this lack of knowledge, which really shaped my desire to go to medical school. And then when I was a third year medical student, my uncle, who was my best friend, died of small cell lung cancer, and that was a very traumatic experience, obviously, for our family. But I was actually working as a researcher at the National Cancer Institute at the time, and I remember sitting in my dorm room, because I was still a medical student, Googling clinical trials and wondering what clinical research was all about. So looking back, also an incredibly defining moment for me to pursue not only being an oncologist, but an oncologist who devotes a career to clinical research. And so I'm just so passionate about it, and so glad that you've made time to talk about this today.
Thank you so much for that. It's such an important, ooh, it's close to my heart. Um, just a quick question. Before we begin, again, if there's any questions about technical support, please put the information in the chat, and Navi will be happy to help you. So, Dr. Maynard, um, we're acknowledging Clinical Trials Day. Today is May 20th, 2021, and it's Clinical Trials Day. And for some people, they know what clinical trials are, but for some, they don't. Can you explain to the audience, those who don't know, what a clinical trial is in just basic terms?
Sure. So clinical trials, and sometimes I wonder, we need to really make sure we let folks know that trials equal treatment, right? It's not just a trial. Clinical trials are a way for us to test new medicines before they're approved, to evaluate if it might be an effective approach. And so, sometimes it's really changed, I think, over the years. I think, even 10, 15 years ago, it used to be that being part of a clinical trial is something you would do when all other treatments were exhausted. In oncology now, we've been fortunate to develop a number of therapies that actually are incredibly effective. And so what that means is sometimes a clinical trial can provide an opportunity to a life-saving drug even before that drug comes to market. And so it really has changed, I think, in terms of how relevant the trial can be to your own personal story. Obviously, you need to be a person who's comfortable with an element of uncertainty. And there is an element of altruism, but it's no longer purely altruism when you're part of a clinical research protocol.
When you speak of altruism, what does that mean? Because I don't know the word.
Sure, sure. So by altruism, I mean, doing something for the betterment of science and the betterment of others that may not directly benefit you. I think, again, historically, when our trials were not as sophisticated as they are now, that element was a much greater part of clinical research. Not to say that it's not somewhat now as well, but I think the possibility that you as an individual will actually benefit from being part of a clinical research study has significantly increased.
Why do you think clinical trials are necessary? Can you explain to the audience? Because um, people really just don't understand, the general public, why clinical trials, because there's not a lot of participation in clinical trials, and I'm a fan of clinical trials, and we all know why, but I just want to hear from you, why are clinical trials necessary from a research perspective?
Sure. So when a drug is tried for a first time in a human patient, to ensure the safety, to ensure that is conducted in a safe and accurate way, trial is necessary. And so, not all trials are created equal. There are phases of trials. So early phase trials are when, trials are when a drug is possibly tried for the first time. And obviously that has more risk than when that drug has already been tested on several hundreds or even thousands of patients. But usually we start with smaller studies to actually gauge that it's worth looking into further. And then it can be, sort of increased to larger studies, and eventually to a study that compares it to whatever the regular care would be that you would receive in this scenario. And if those trials are positive, then usually it's submitted for approval by the FDA, and then it's widely available.
Got it. So this past month, I've been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of people, a lot of new Karen's Club members. And I spoke to one particular woman. She was highly educated. She had been offered a clinical trial by her oncologist. She was diagnosed with an advanced cancer. And she's an educated woman. And the very first question to me, which I was surprised, was, I've been offered this clinical trial. Will I be experimented on? And I was like, wow. And I know what my response was. I can remember it was like, no, it's not allowable. They have safety measures in place. But when I talk to somebody about it, it's different than when it would come from you. When I'm thinking, when the person of color is asking about, experimentation, or am I going to be a guinea pig? What do you say to them, or what do you say to the community when the people of color who are on the fence and who have that that feeling and that notion and that idea that in 2021 a person of color can go into a clinical trial and feel like they're going to be experimented on? How would you respond to that?
Sure. So I definitely try to explain again why this design of giving therapy is necessary, right? And sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's still not. I then tell folks that my team jokes that every trial we conduct has to pass the Maynard litmus test. So I am notoriously critical of trials. I'm critical. I think that we need to actually, as a community in oncology, be very selective with the trials we choose to do. And we in Perlmutter Cancer Center are totally in that position. We get offers to do, multiple different kinds of study. And you can't do them all well. So I do not choose trials unless they are trials I would enroll a family member to. Right.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, that is, I think, a powerful statement for patients, but it's true. All studies aren't created equal. It doesn't mean that there's actually bad studies out there. It just means that, oncology, I think, is different from a lot of different specialties just because the stakes are often very high. Okay. And I think that we do have to be in a position to, talk about why this study is important. And often when I'm able to explain to patients, why I, as your physician, really think this is the right thing to do, hopefully I'm able to earn some of that trust.
When we speak of trust, because trust is a big and is a huge issue in patients of color in our community in regards to clinical trials, can you touch on some of those safety measures? Because there's a lot of misconception about, is this actually safe? Is there someone overseeing what's going on here?
Sure,
Or are the
sure.
researchers just
So
doing their thing?
So the first thing that I think is always clear is the process of informed consent. And that's where, we sit with patients, and the consent form could be 30, 40 pages. And you really have to block time to sit and go through it page by page with patients, and make them and help them understand, any questions that they might have. Usually if, sometimes, for instance, a trial has a placebo arm, that is not something that's determined usually by the treating doctor. I think when we start to explain that, it does help patients a lot, because, it's not like I can, decide, who's going where. It's usually done very randomly by a computer. And so, hopefully folks will then, understand that element of, gee, this is really a very rigorously designed test of the therapy, but it's not a test on me, as an individual. I think other things, that I try to explain, are, what happens when side effects happen. So we are under very, very strict reporting requirements. When something goes wrong, we need to first make a very careful and thoughtful assessment if it's the cancer or if it's the new drug that's causing the side effects, because sometimes, patients just
Right.
don't feel well because of their disease. And then from there needs to be reporting to the study's sponsor, sometimes reporting to the FDA, sometimes reporting to our institutional review board, our IRB. So we are held to very high standards to make sure that we are conducting the study safely. And then at the Perlmutter Cancer Center, we always have to be audit ready. That is our policy. So if the FDA wants to stop in and make sure we're doing everything okay, as they did recently, and we did a great job,
Okay.
then we need to be ready, right? That's our job. And so I guess those are some of the things I would try to explain to patients.
Hey, look who's joining. Look like Sheila was joining us, the patient advocate. I think she bounced in and bounced out. Hey, Sheila, how are you? Everyone in the audience, this is the patient advocate, the powerful patient advocate I was speaking of. I'm so glad you are here to join us today. Thank you for making it in. Everyone, this is Sheila.
You. So
You
you
want to give an introduction and tell people a little about yourself before we continue?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. Sorry. I don't know. That's the first time that's happened, but
Technical support that happens.
I'm here.
Okay.
My name is Sheila, and I live in the St. Louis, Missouri area, but I live on the Illinois side, about 4 hours from Chicago. I am a 25-year Air Force veteran, and I've been metastatic for 11 years. I was de novo. It has spread to my liver and ribs. My mom died of metastatic breast cancer in 2004, and I received the diagnosis while active duty in 2009. I'm currently on a clinical trial, and I've been on it for, it'll be 3 years in July. July of 2018 is when I started my clinical trial, and I'm just here to talk about my experience and what I can do as an advocate to help patients understand that clinical trials are important and we need this research.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate you hanging in there with us and with all the technical, shenanigans going on. Sheila, the doctor and I, Dr. Maynard and I were talking about discussing safety and discussing the way in which in the community of color that we see, some of us see clinical trials as a negative, as a negative thing. It's something that's not beneficial. If someone were to say to you, hey, Sheila, you were on this clinical trial, really, why would you do that? When someone says something negative about a clinical trial, like, what is your just like basic response when you think about, that trying to change that narrative in regards to the negativity in clinical trials? Talk to me about that.
Well, first of all, as an education, don't just bring to me that, because you have to understand the our culture, as far as clinical trials, as far as understanding Henrietta Lacks and understanding the syphilis project with Tuskegee Airmen, and first understand why we're hesitant about medical mistrust. And then from that understanding, it's up to people like me and advocates to me. My motto was, if I'm gonna walk the walk, I'm gonna talk the talk. So if my platform is clinical trials, this is what I'm going to trust. And I trusted it, and 3 years later, almost in July, it's working for me. So hopefully they will see this Black girl I'm originally from Cleveland, and they'll say, man, Sheila's tried it. Maybe we need to ask the right question. And always, I always say, have that patient physician uh, relationship that, if your doctor doesn't bring up clinical trials, would say, hey, what about his clinical trial? So, like I said, it's up to me to continue to educate people about in clinical trials, especially the Black community, because yeah, it's still people that don't want to take the COVID vaccine because of medical mistrust. So we just have to continue to educate and continue to put positive things out there that yeah, they're safe. We need it. Our genes are different. And we need this research. We need for researchers to ask Black women to be in clinical trials. Don't just keep giving me, I keep hearing the same percentage. Well, it's only 5-6% of Black women that go on clinical trials. Well, what are you doing about it? Are you going to community hospitals? Do you know that 71% of of Black women are single parents. So what are you doing about that? Are you getting them transportation to even get to clinical trials? You know, the clinical trial I'm on, I sit there for between maybe about 8 to 9 hours. I was just there last Monday.
Hmm.
And I'm blessed that I can go and sit there and get all the EKGs and different things. But what about women that have small children? So know your patient, you know, and know and explain to them and let them say no. There's some assume that I don't want to be on a clinical trial, but explain it to me, you know. So
That's interesting. I think what you're saying is just so powerful. It's just resonating with me so much when because like I said, this issue is so dear to me. And Dr. Maynard and I were talking about clinical trials, and I just want to take a step back for a moment. When was a clinical trial first presented to you in your journey? Sheila, when was it presented to you and who was it presented to you by? Because a lot of people don't understand, like, okay, what is the process like to get into a clinical trial? So who presented the idea of going into a clinical trial to you?
well, my oncologist, which I call my angel, I told her if she move, I'm moving with her because we stuck. We got this 11-year relationship going on.
I know that's right.
But it was my doctor, and it was clinical trials. One thing I'm gonna say, they're not last resorts because it wasn't a last resort. I had a fourth progression on my ribs, um, July of 2018, and she said, "Well, you can go back on the standard, like Taxol, whatever." And then she said, "But no, I have this wonderful trial I want you to try." I said, "Wonderful." And she said, "Yeah, I have an 80-year-old patient that's on it." I said, "Well, shoot, I'm 50. I can get on it too." So, we talked about it, and she brought in a clinical trial coordinator. That's another thing that should be a part of it should be a team effort. So my clinical trial coordinator is involved, even my oncology nurses, everything. It takes a village, you know. So we talked about it, and I said, well, I asked the questions that I had. I still continue to have questions, especially when they gave me the written consent. If you don't understand the written consent, don't sign it. Get with your clinical trial coordinator and say, hey, I don't understand this. I don't understand that. What do you mean I have to come back every 6 weeks for the past 2.5 years? I have to go for scans. Well, explain this to me, and then go back, talk it over with your family and say, well, hey, I think this clinical trial might work. And the first thing my family said was, well, what's this experimental drug? I'm like, this is top-notch research. And it actually got FDA approved. I found out at San Antonio 2019. It's FDA approved now. So it is a drug that people are using. So, I'm still just on the clinical trial portion. But yeah, it was brought to me by my doctor, and I trust her, And I
Okay.
said, let's go for it.
I love that. This conversation is so good. Um, just to let everybody know, if you want more information about clinical trials and want to have a one-on-one conversation, feel free to sign up to karensclub.org to sign up for a free consultation, and we can have a chat with, you can have a chat with one of the patient advocates who's been through a clinical trial and actually speak to someone and have a conversation. This conversation is really good. And I want to switch over to Dr. Maynard and ask this question I've been meaning to ask for a moment now. I'm really excited. I discovered you through a newspaper article in regards to the research you'd recently done that went into the news in regards to the melanoma clinical trial that you have been running. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you talk about those results and put into context how this trial could have benefited African Americans or other non-participating people of color who are thinking about clinical trials but don't participate? And when I think about the context for myself, I'm like, my goodness, people of color are often diagnosed with skin cancer at a later stage.
100%.
And their poorer survival rates because of that. And was this a missed opportunity? So can you talk to us about the trial and how important that research is?
Yeah, sure. So I think what this trial was trying to do was we actually have a modified cold virus, the Coxsackie virus, and it's been formulated so it can be injected directly into a tumor, and patients with melanoma and Black and Hispanic patients get melanoma too, right? Although it tends to be, it's a different variety than the variety of melanoma that fair skin patients get. So they probably are biologic differences there.
Mm.
But Nonetheless, what we were trying to do was inject that tumor with the virus and then follow it with an immunotherapy to see if that would be a more effective approach. And it was a small study, but what we found, it was, first of all, it was incredibly safe. It was not any different side effects really than if we had given the immunotherapy alone by itself. And I think, the advantage is that, when the patients who responded, we were surprised by what their tumors looked like. So in general, when patients get immunotherapy, the ones who respond immediately have tumors, for a lack of a better term, we say that they're hot tumors. And what that means is they're loaded with T cells, and the medicine just sort of wakes the T cells back up and helps them do their job. If a tumor is cold, it doesn't have all those cells there sitting ready to go, but maybe you can do something to re-energize that tumor, like inject it with a virus. And so we were pleasantly surprised to see that the folks whose tumors weren't primed and ready to go actually responded to the medicine. So maybe there's a connection there, and it needs to be explored in a bigger study. I think it's important to have different populations in a trial like that, because you're going to learn again about the different flavors that melanoma comes in. It's not all one disease. I think that's something, there's a type of melanoma out there called acral melanoma that Black patients often get. And we don't have a lot of great therapies for acral. We need to learn, right? And so this is that opportunity, because a lot of times as part of a trial, we'll for instance, take a couple of tumor biopsies, and what we can do to learn from that tumor now is so much more powerful than what we could do even 10 years ago. I will say that information is often also heavily protected. So, that information is, de-identified usually from, the patient's name and birth date and stored in a database where it's only identified by a number, and only people who have access to the database can see. So I think that's a concern that sometimes people have, like what are they going to do with that tissue? And in general, we go through enormous safeguards to make sure we're learning about the disease, but protecting the privacy of the patient.
Thank you for that. So I want to ask both of you, Sheila and Dr. Maynard, what do you think the benefits of clinical trials, or can you explain the benefits of clinical trials for patients with advanced cancer? What the benefits are for a person with advanced cancer who's in a clinical trial? Sheila, do you want to start?
Well, for me, it's a new medicine that they're trying to see if it's going to effectively work on me. And I think that that's important. Like I said, when I started my clinical trial, I had, of course, I had a lot of questions, but it's top-notch research. It's research that could potentially be, life-saving. Herceptin sat on the shelf for years, but now they calling that the miracle drug, for HER2 positive patients. So I think those who came before me, especially those that were, on clinical trials, for me to continue to live 11 years later with the metastatic disease that spread to my liver and wheels, and I had no clue that I was going to still be here 11 years later. But because of top-notch research and because of women and men before me that were on clinical trials, I'm still here, and I'm blessed. And I continuously thank the researchers who work tirelessly, effectively, and efficiently to get us medicines that's going to give us the best quality of life we can with the metastatic disease. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you for that. That was really so powerful. Doctor, do you want to add to that what the benefits are for somebody who's in a clinical trial with advanced cancer and thinking about, well, maybe I should think of clinical trials as an option versus standard of care?
Sure. I mean, again, I think, it's often an opportunity for patients to get access to an approach that they otherwise would not have for many years. And again, there's always, there's an element of uncertainty. You don't know if it's going to be a positive study. Some of the questions you can ask your doctor are, what kind of information led to the study to begin with, right? And that can be very helpful in decision making. But there are times where, yes, it's possible that the study will not work the drug won't work the way we think. But what we often think is when patients especially have advanced disease, for instance, and we have a drug that's really effective, when we move it to a scenario where patients then just have the drug immediately after surgery, the odds of that being a positive study are much higher because we already have some data. And actually, Sheila, your point about, what are you doing to help patients really resonated with me, because I had just last week a young patient, young mom from Brooklyn, who has a Merkel cell carcinoma, which is a very rare type of skin cancer. And I sort of had to work it to, make people do what they needed to do so that way she could get her radiation close to home and then just come in the city to see me. That took a little bit of arm twisting, but I was happy to do it. So yeah, I'm arm twisting on the part of, the folks that they have to do a certain type of credentialing in order to do that. And it's a lot of paperwork and it had to be done very quickly. So by being, a little bit of a pit bull, I managed to pull it off. So, but I think that that's what you want in your physician. You want your physician to be so excited about this study that they're willing, to push the rock uphill a little bit to get it done. Because at the end of the day, being a clinical researcher is a very, very difficult job. There's just, because the regulatory process is so intense to keep our patients safe, there's often a lot of bottlenecks. If you can think about, an orchestra with 100 instruments, every instrument's got its own little part to play, right? And if one of those instruments goes out of tune, maybe, you won't have a slot to start when your patient needs it. So it is often a lot of us, really, advocating and spending energy. And that's what you want to see. You want to see that your team is so excited about this. They're going to go the extra mile to make sure you have access to it.
I definitely feel that. Sheila, can you tell us how important is it to share your story in regards to breast cancer clinical trials on a format or a platform like karensclub.org? How important is it to get the message out for someone of color who's been in a clinical trial?
Because when I was first diagnosed, I don't know if this will sound crazy or not, but the only person that I knew that had breast cancer was my mom. And I didn't know that you could literally die from breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't know the subtypes. I still to this day don't know what subtype my mom have. I'm HER2 positive. And I was just like, man, 20, sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. We're here with you. I'm just glad you're sharing your story. It's really important. That's what we want to do here at Karen's Club. Let you share your story.
But I didn't know a lot of things.
Mm.
And I just wish you, I don't know whether I didn't take the time but I just wish I knew more about breast cancers, because I didn't know 5 years later I would have this awful disease and I found out that I had metastatic. I sneezed and it burned.
Mm.
And I went to my military doctor and I was just like, well, what's wrong? It's something that's burning. And they did the MRI and they said, yeah, it's in your ribs. I didn't know you can get cancer on your ribs, And he said that the cancer was pushing up on your ribs. That's what you were feeling. So I think, when I looked at commercials, I only seen white women, older women. So I just didn't know. I thought I was doing my walks. I'm, giving money. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in a society. And it's like, no, there's so much more work to do. And then by being in the military, medical care was free for me for 25 years. So, now I'm going to a civilian hospital. I still don't have to pay co-pays or anything. I'm blessed because the military is still taking care of me. But, I'm looking into like, man, people got to pay co-pays. And so I'm like, well, what can I do, to help people, learn about clinical trials and learn about breast cancer and continue to bring it to my community to just continue to educate, especially young women. Young women can get breast cancer too, because we look at it as an older woman, white woman's disease, and it's not, So I just want people to look at me and say, well, hey, Sheila tried that clinical trial. Well, let me try it. Let me just think about it. Let me just talk it over with my doctor.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that and being so vulnerable and so open to sharing that. I really appreciate that. And Dr. Maynard, when patients thinking about, they're on the fence and they're thinking about a clinical trial, but they're not really sure what's like the procedure, that the first thing someone who's thinking about a clinical trial should do.
So when people have heard about the study and they don't they're still uncertain, I often just say, tell me your fear. Tell me what you're the most afraid of. Because often it's, something that we can navigate together. But I think, again, the things to really consider are, is this right for me at this point in time? And try to do your best to do an objective comparison to what you will be doing if you don't go on the study, right? So for instance, again, I've mentioned we give patients a consent form. It's very long and it can be very intimidating to read all those side effects. But to be honest, if you're going to get regular chemotherapy or immunotherapy, you're also going to have, a list a mile long of potential side effects. And, I think that it's important to make sure you're doing a thoughtful comparison to the alternative, not just saying no out of fear. I think the other thing to remember about oncology is it is our job to tell you the worst case scenario in terms of side effects. And often when we give you a consent form, we try to break it down to common and severe, to what can happen. But remember, a lot of times we also have very, very specialized training in how to make sure we can control those side effects when they do happen. So that communication with your doctor and nurse, because no person can do this work alone. You have always a team behind you. It's very, very close communication in real time of what's going on with you is a really important part of this.
That's so important. And so, doctor, just out of curiosity, your response, I can't wait to hear this. How can Karen's Club help doctors feel comfortable about approaching communities of color about clinical trials? Because it seems to be sort of like an information gap out there in regards to clinical trials and people of color. And so wherever we can get the information is very important, whether it be the doctor, whether it be a caregiver who's thought about that and maybe have talked to a doctor. But how can we sort of like Karen's Club, as a platform, help doctors bridge that gap?
I think show us directly where the gaps are, because I think most clinical researchers really are, like I said, it's a hard job. We're really committed to begin with. But, and most people with this in such an important time to be talking about diversity in healthcare, most of us really want to change things, but we may just not know how. So show us where those gaps are, show us who to talk to, how to talk to, invite me to things like this, right? This was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And give us some pointers. Tell us what we need to do to get the message out. I think you'll find that many of us are really very willing.
That's real talk, and that's very honest, and I appreciate that. Sheila, lastly, is there anything else that you want to say to the community in regards to your journey, or share like maybe two, or three, pieces of advice for someone who may be on the fence, or, may be thinking, I'm not really sure, I don't know what to do, clinical trials, like what would you say to them? Just three pieces of advice or two.
Well, when I talked to, because as she was saying about side effects, the nausea is is brutal. But I kept talking to my doctor, and I was just like, this nausea, and I said, I want to get off. And she said, and with a clinical trial, you can get off at any time. You don't have to stay on it. And she said, no. She said, what we're going to do is we're going to sit here and we're going to figure out what can we do to effectively control your side effects. Actually brought a pharmacist in, and we all sat there and we discussed how we was going to control my nausea, and now it's better, it's under control. So it's important that we continue to keep patients first. Think about, when researchers are doing whatever they do in the lab, think about the patient, think about the side effects, think about how it's going to affect our family. I say if a clinical trial can give me one more day to use my voice, then, I've done good, and, you, this is your body. This is you. So whether you make the decision of being on a clinical trial or whether you don't, it's your choice. Only you can dictate your journey. There was no, I didn't know it was gonna last 2.5 years. It could have lasted 6 months, but I just, continually talked to my doctor, And she was like, come on, we can do this. And every time she comes in smiling, I'm smiling. She was like, oh, you're doing so good. So, you know, so, that feels good, and I just want to continue to use my voice to just, if you have questions, ask your doctor. Don't go to the internet. My doctor always say, don't go to the internet. Come to me first. But yeah, ask your doctor any questions about clinical trials. You can go on clinicaltrials.org, your website, or
Yeah.
different things, and just find out read up on them first. And if you have any questions, just continue to ask questions. There's no right or wrong question. There's no right or wrong answer because we don't know.
Thank you so much for
You
that,
don't
Sheila.
know you don't know what you don't know. So
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Speaking of questions, Sheila, we've got some in the chat, and I just wanted to pose a few of them before we let both of you go back to your busy days. I just want to thank you again both for being here. And the first question we have is, I think it's for the doctor. In a clinical trial such as yours, does how does a person know that they're getting the drug or getting a placebo?
Very, very good question. So not every trial has a placebo as part of it. And that's usually something that's spelled out very, very clearly in the beginning when we go through the consent process. So the trial that I ran actually had no placebo. Everybody got the virus drug. And so the reason when we start to get to the point where we incorporate a placebo, it's usually because we're getting very, very far along in testing, and we need to compare it to whatever the existing standard is in order to have something cross the finish line to approval. So that's why a placebo is sometimes used, but your physician will tell you, whether or not a placebo is in a particular study.
Got it. And either one of you can take this question or both. Um, what is the most important thing we can do to achieve appropriate representation in clinical trials? So, Sheila, what do you think about that question?
first asking us and telling us about clinical trials, and then going into the communities. The Black community is faith-based. Why not have PSAs on clinical trials for a Sunday announcement? Okay, I'm here to explain about clinical trials. If you ever had to, thinking about one, or just want to know one, or just was diagnosed with breast cancer or any kind of cancer,
Right.
just have different PSAs out there, going into meet people where they are, And I just, there are so many things in place now from when Henrietta Lacks and syphilis, like the IRB boards and different things. There's so many different things that they, like the doctor was saying, that you have to go through before it's even, approved or goes through the phases. But there's so many different things, and that's something to understand. You need to not be scared of them. And like I said, if you don't like it, you can get off of it, But it's not always the last resort. So just meet people where they are, and it's all about an education piece. And if I can continue to be on platforms like this with amazing doctors and people hearing my story, hopefully it'll resonate, and you'll be sitting in the office and say, well, wait a minute, this conversation I had about this clinical trial, let me just ask a question. It doesn't hurt to ask a question. So.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Doctor, what do you think about that question, about the question that was in the chat about what is the most important thing we can do to achieve appropriate representation in clinical trials?
I think just, widespread communication about why a trial, again, then this goes back to, how can the word trial itself sounds like experiment, right? So, we need to somehow get across that it's really treatment. It's not just a trial. It's really a important part of, and it's, an important part of your individualized treatment planning as a patient. But it's also, remember, it's about you, right? That's what I tell patients, like, this is about you. You don't, you patients are so afraid sometimes to disappoint their doctors. And I tell people, stop, that this is about your journey and how I'm here to help you. So do not feel do not be afraid of asking me questions. Do not be afraid of saying what your fears are. Do not be afraid of declining the study. But at least let's have the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And one more question. Someone asked in the chat about the cost. Like, you know, is it free or can I afford a clinical trial? It sounds very expensive. Doctor, what do you say to that?
Yeah, so I will say that in general, there are a lot of efforts made to make sure it's not more expensive. So anything research related is usually provided as part of the trial. Any extra medicines, any extra blood draws, that are pure research, are usually, we try to make sure the patient is not charged for those. So hopefully if there's going to be, expenses to you, it's what you would have received anyway as a standard of care patient. I will say, however, that despite our best efforts, sometimes that doesn't happen. And our patient advocate alluded to, even just long missed days of work, right? I mean, it is more time that's involved. Transportation, coming back for extra visits, even if we don't charge you a copay, which most studies don't, but some do, it depends on the study. You still have to pay to park. We do our best to mitigate those costs. There's often patient programs that we'll try to get the study sponsor, or we'll try to get patient advocacy programs to help us with those costs. But they are a real part of clinical research, and I think it's important to be aware of them. That being said, I think we do everything we can to try to mitigate that.
And there's one last question. Someone asked in the chat, what is the follow-up care like for someone who's in a trial? So I know what it was like for me, but doctor, can you explain like what that's like, or once the person is off the trial, what actually happens in regards to the care that they actually receive?
Sure. So, I mean, a lot of times you start to follow a follow-up schedule that would be very similar to what you would follow if you weren't on a study, with scans every, several months, blood draws every few months. Sometimes there are still a few research pieces of it. Sometimes you get to a point where we just connect by phone, where you may not be coming in necessarily for physical visits, but one of our study personnel will reach out to you and ask how you're feeling and if you've had any new problems lately. So it really depends on the study. But in general, we try to make it mirror what you would receive even if you were not on a study.
And doctor, if someone who is thinking about getting on a trial in regards to melanoma or skin cancer, how would they find out about your trial?
Very good question. So a lot of times there is a central database called clinicaltrials.gov. That can be a little hard to navigate, I will say, but it's there. Our patient advocacy groups try to really make sure that the word is out there. So there's, for melanoma, there's a wonderful group called AIM at Melanoma. So the internet is a decent source of information. Honestly, social media is becoming more and more important. There are Facebook groups and Twitter groups, especially for specific diseases that tend to be more rare, like the Merkel cell carcinoma that I mentioned has an enormous internet presence. So I think, just as a patient, demanding that be part of the conversation about your treatment. That's my wish, is that it's a mandatory part of the conversation. Hard to make sure reinforce that, because honestly, not everybody has the training that clinical researchers have. But I really think as patients, you should really be, you deserve to have that be part of your initial consultation.
Thank you so much. Sheila, is there anything else you want to say to anybody before we sign off here today?
No, I would just say, don't beat yourself up. Ask lots of questions, and just, live. I know it's hard, because sometimes it gets hard for me. Sometimes I just want to have my pity party, but just believe in yourself and believing that you're making the right decision for yourself, because at the end of the day, you have to live with the decision. Nobody else does but you. So, and just read up on clinical trials, learn about them, even if you just flipping through, on the internet, just read up on them about the different phases. And like the doctor said, clinicaltrials.gov is kind of,
Yeah.
but there are so many other websites that you can go to that also talk about clinical trials. So just don't beat yourself up. You're doing good. and you're not alone. You're not alone. You can call me, text, or email, whatever, anytime. Just know you're not alone in this battle. I call it a battle because I'm military, but you're not alone in this battle.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. This was such a rich conversation. Oh, Nav, you want to say something? My partner, please.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, but I was wondering, I know, Karen, a lot of people here might know your story, but I think a lot of people might not. So maybe in a couple of minutes, if you could just tell us what brought you here, I think that would be really, really good to hear. I know hearing Sheila's story has been so powerful, but I think it would be awesome to just hear a little bit from you, what your background is as well.
I got very lucky. My name is Karen Peterson again. I'm the founder and chief patient advocate of Karen's Club. Clinical trials are really dear and near to me. I'm a fan of cancer research. A clinical trial saved my life. When I only had a 4% chance of survival, I was diagnosed with stage 4 triple negative breast cancer in 2017. My original team didn't believe that a clinical trial should even be an option. I shouldn't even be discussing it. I should exhaust all standard conventional therapy was the term used at the time. And I was astute and smart enough, thank goodness, to be on clinicaltrials.gov for a while and look at those exclusionary criteria, those things that keep you out of a trial. And at the time, they were, clear. If you've had too many, lines of treatment or been treated too many times, you won't be able to be participate in a clinical trial. And as far as I know, I felt like for me, I needed to make an informed decision. Standard of care wasn't going to disappear. It wasn't going anywhere. But the window of opportunity for a clinical trial sometimes is very, very small. And I thought to myself, I want to make an informed decision. I was, out there talking to doctors. And so I divorced my original team. I found a research oncologist. She was brave enough and smart enough to say, you know what, you want to think about genomic testing if you want to make an informed decision. Maybe this test will come back and give you some information that you can use to make an informed decision to get into a clinical trial, and it did. And so I was out there searching and looking, and finally I just identified myself to a principal investigator at NYU. His name is Dr. Daniel Cho, and I told him I didn't have an oncologist. I hear you're doing some research. Can you help a girl out? And he called me back himself, and he said, yeah, I have something coming down the pipeline. Would you like to be involved? I was the first triple negative breast cancer patient in the nation on a trial. And this was 12 weeks after being diagnosed metastatic. And 8 weeks after being on a trial, something, really beautiful happened, and my body started to heal itself. And I got really, really lucky. And so I've been deemed, as I think they call it, no evidence of disease as of 2019. And this could not have happened to me if I had not joined the clinical trial. I was given a 4% chance of survival. A triple negative breast cancer is very aggressive breast cancer, especially in its advanced stage. It was dire straits. And, the fact that, this principal investigator reached out to me himself and said, I've got something for you. Let's take a shot at it. And he gave me hope. And so this is the reason why it inspired me to create with you Karen's Club, because I feel like these stories need to be told. I can remember when I was out there looking for stories like mine, and there were a lot, I just couldn't find them. So I think it's really important to share to the communities of color that yes, we can be involved in clinical trials, and yes, they are safe, and yes, it is an option that should be on the table when you think about radiation, when you think about chemotherapy, when you think about all those things. Oh my goodness, yeah, they're doing construction of the brownstone next door, but yeah, that's it.
And just thank you, first of all. Thank you so much, Karen. And I shared this in the chat, but if y'all could spend just 2 minutes giving us your feedback, it is hugely helpful to future sessions like this we want to hold, to the future work we want to do. We'd really, really appreciate it. I want to leave it to Karen to thank our amazing panelists, because I don't think I'll do it justice, but just so grateful for all of you for being here, particularly Sheila and Dr. Menard. So incredible. And for everyone who joined. Karen,
Thank you.
I'll leave it to you to close out.
I just want to say thanks. This was the very first series of educational webinars that Karen's Club wants to continue to do. So I'm hoping that other doctors and other researchers and other clinicians and other nonprofits and people, will come together and have these discussions because it's important. It's life-saving information. Like I said, without a clinical trial, I would not be here with you guys today. So thank both of you, Dr. Maynard and Sheila. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, on behalf of Karen's Club.
Meeting you, doctor.
Later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Karen, thank you for the invitation.
Nice meeting you,
Thank
doctor.
you. Bye.